Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here. This is Jason from Primetime Aquatics. I am so glad that you are here today. We're going to be talking about the Siamese Algae Eater. This is a great fish, especially if you have blackbeard or green hair algae issues in your aquarium. Hope you enjoyed the video. Appreciate you being here. So yes, this is the Siamese Algae Eater. It is a great fish and has been an absolute workhorse for us in the fish room gallery. I'll explain why as we go through this video. By the way, big thank you to Picasso Exotic Aquatics in Lenexa, Kansas. They allowed us to film these fish as well as their display tank. So if you're ever in the area, check them out. Their information is down in the description below. But as I mentioned, this is an awesome fish. Right now, what you're seeing is a fish that's around 2.5 inches or so. That's typically the size at which they are sold, but this is a fish that's going to get to around 6 inches. So as we're going through the care, keep that in mind that this is a little bit of a larger fish. Females aren't going to get quite so large, but they might be a little bit rounder. Now, their temperament is usually pretty good. They're relatively peaceful fish that tend to ignore other types of fish unless those other types of fish look a lot like them. Like, for instance, the flying fox. Here's a great picture that really shows the difference between the flying fox and the Siamese Algae Eater. Maybe some of the loaches at the bottom of the tank. Again, there might be an opportunity there for a little bit of sparring, but nothing usually too bad. The males can be a little bit aggressive towards one another, so in a smaller tank, it's best to have maybe just one. Once you get to those 4-foot and 6-foot tanks like we have, you can keep multiples, and usually that's not going to be a problem. I think the main thing and the reason why people buy these fish is they are renowned algae eaters, as the name implies, but there's really two types of algae that they really enjoy. One is blackbeard algae, and that's why we dispersed them throughout our fish room gallery or throughout our fish gallery, because we were starting to see blackbeard algae in a lot of our tanks. And these fish, it took about 6 weeks or so, but the blackbeard algae was mostly gone on our plants and on our rocks. And so this is a great fish if you give them some time. They're constantly munching, they're constantly on the move, and I think that's what attracts people to them. The other type of algae that they love to eat is the green hair algae, which is probably why it's in this tank right here, just to keep that at bay, especially within the moss. And so they are really good at those two types of algae. By the way, if you want to know how to combat algae, check out that video in the upper right hand corner. We go over the different types and the types of organisms that will eat each type of algae. So that is up there for you in case you want to check it out. I'll put that in the description as well. Lifespan, these are fish that can live a long time. We've had them in our fish room. We've had fish live as long as 6, 7, 8 years. So this is a fish that'll be with you for a while. In terms of tank mates, again, if you're going to be keeping the Siamese Algae Eater and you want to keep them in groups, it's best to have at least a 4-foot, if not a 6-foot tank. Generally speaking, they're going to do well in groups in those larger aquariums. By the way, if you're looking for these fish or other fish, check out Flip Aquatics, flipaquatics.com. Their information is down in the description below. They are a channel sponsor and they sell awesome fish and shrimp. They quarantine their stuff to make sure that your fish and your shrimp are going to show up healthy. So check them out, flipaquatics.com, down in the description below. Now, tank mates for these fish, again, they tend to tolerate other fish pretty well, and so you've got a lot of options. You could do most of your tetra types. Most of your rasbors are usually going to be okay. Most of your barbs, even more of your fin nippy barbs like your tiger barbs, they usually just ignore one another. The gouramis, most of your gouramis are just fine. We've kept them with all types. Cory cats usually work out okay. Plecos, most of your live bears. So most of your community fish are generally going to do just fine. Now, the water parameters for these fish, they're not super picky. So in terms of temperature, anywhere from 70-ish up to around 80 to 82. We keep them pretty close to 80, 78 to 80. No problems there. The pH range, again, anywhere from 6 to 8. For us, our pH is a lot closer to an 8. If you want to know why pH is such an important water parameter, check out that video in the upper right-hand corner. Water hardness, anywhere from around 3 to 12 degrees. A little bit on the softer side is probably going to be more ideal. We keep them close to around 10 degrees on the water hardness for GH and KH. They do just fine. In terms of water quality, this is not a fish that tends to tolerate an uncycled tank. So no ammonia, no nitrite. Try to keep your nitrates at 20 parts per million or less. If it's a planted tank, it can go a little bit higher. Feeding these fish, generally speaking, is not a problem. We bring in lots of these fish to sell at our swaps in the local Chicagoland area, and it is never hard getting these fish to eat, even when we bring them in hundreds at a time. We feed all of our fish North Fin foods, so North Fin flakes, the micro pellets. They absolutely go crazy for, and I love watching them eat the North Fin kelp wafers. They will form like a little tornado and just kind of swirl around it and eat the North Fin kelp wafers. It's actually very entertaining to watch. They would eat some brine shrimp. They will nibble on bloodworms as well. So again, this is not a hard fish to feed. When it comes to the tank size, I've alluded at this a few times throughout the video. Ideally, you're going to have at least a 40-gallon or larger. Could you put one in a 29? Maybe, but again, this is a 6-inch fish, and with that small of a territory, sometimes they start to really kind of stake out a territory and chase other fish around a little bit. So I really like to have one in a 40. Once we get to the 55s, still maybe 1 or 3 or 4. By the time we're getting into the 75s and certainly the 6-foot tanks, I do like to keep them in groups of 4, 5, or 6, and I generally don't have problems doing that even as they get older. And that's really where, if you're going to see aggression, you're going to see it as they get a little bit older. Like the fish that you're seeing here, this was a larger one in this display tank, and it was probably close to 4.5 inches or so. That's when they can tend to get a little bit more aggressive. But I've also found, in terms of setting up your tank, if you've got hiding spots, if you've got caves and plants, whether it's fake or real, driftwood, rocks, if they've got that area where they can kind of just call their own, there's a little bit less aggression there too. And speaking of decorations, again, you're looking at a great example here. Wood, rocks, plants, caves, they love that kind of stuff. Substrate, this is one where they will interact with the substrate a little bit, so it might be better to have them on sand, although the gravel isn't necessarily going to do anything bad. It's just I would prefer to have these fish on a sand substrate. For the color, it really doesn't matter if you go lighter or darker. If you have a darker substrate, darker background, they'll muddy up a little bit, and so the rest of the fish won't look quite as drastic compared to that black stripe across the body. It'll tend to look a little bit more similar, but this is not, quite frankly, a fish that I put in a tank where it's going to gain a lot of attention. This is a fish where what I want it to do is work. I want it to clean off surfaces, make sure blackbeard algae doesn't get a hold, make sure my green hair algae is in check, and this fish will absolutely do that. It's an all-star when it comes to eating those two types of algae. If you've got the diatom algae or that hard green spot algae, you're probably going to be looking more for bristlenose plecos or maybe mystery snails, but this guy for the blackbeard and the green hair algae does a really, really nice job. If you're thinking about breeding these fish, I wouldn't bother. There's not a lot out there on how to breed them. I've never even attempted it, but it's just a fish that is better bought from a pet store. They're not necessarily easy to breed. Now, if you're thinking about buying this fish, again, they're awesome. They're going to keep your blackbeard algae and your green hair algae in check. They're relatively peaceful. They'll do well in larger groups, in larger tanks. This is not a fish I really think is a great option if you've got less than a 40-gallon for the most part. The challenging part, again, is just making sure that you can manage aggression if you get more than one. But this is an awesome fish, especially if you've got those algae problems like I keep mentioning. Would love to hear from you if you've had these fish before. What was your experience? Again, if you want some information about tank mates or different types of algae, check out those videos down in the description below and in the upper and lower right-hand corner. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.